History is full of leaders who came to power as saviors against some kind of crisis, economic or social. Barack Obama arrived to face the still smoldering consequences of the financial crisis. Nayib Bukele promised to fight a lack of security, and Javier Milei aims to put an end once and for all to Argentina's economic decline. And another example is Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister who arrived with the mission of sorting out a huge political and economic mess. His mission? To prevent the shipwreck of both the Conservative Party and the United Kingdom itself. After the scandals of Boris Johnson and the chaos created by his predecessor, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak's time had come. The new Prime Minister then took the reins both of the Conservative Party that had been absolutely devastated in the polls, and of a country that seemed unable to keep pace with the rest of the world, and that so far has failed to capitalise on Brexit. Perhaps that is why, upon his arrival, the new Prime Minister was clear about one thing. There was no time for frills or embarking on big projects. It was time to act on very concrete fronts. And so, as soon as he arrived, he made it very clear what his 5 main objectives as Prime Minister were: reduce inflation, tackle the budget gap, fix the healthcare system, tackle illegal immigration, and grow the economy. Keep in mind, we are hardly talking about a revolution. With small wins in each of these 5 areas, Sunak thought he could right the ship and arrive at the 2024 elections in top form. So now the question is, has Sunak achieved his goals? Is he succeeding in rescuing the Conservative Party? Does he have a realistic chance of continuing to occupy 10 Downing Street? Well, that is precisely what we have to answer in this video. Fire up your engines and let's get started.
An accursed inheritance.
Okay, I think there is little doubt. The legacy Sunak received from Truss and her predecessors was disastrous. Remember, for example, how poorly Truss explained her fiscal plan and how that ended up leading to a pound crisis, huge political chaos, and the end of the shortest government in UK history. The former Prime Minister wanted to accelerate growth with the biggest tax cut since 1972 and the elimination of many regulations. The problem was that, at the same time, she wanted to boost public spending to finance huge defense spending packages and to compensate companies for the energy price crisis caused by the fallout with Russia. These spending plans were temporary, but Liz Truss failed to be consistent, explain herself well, and present an orderly plan. It was a huge mess. Of course, these are far from the only problems Sunak has had to deal with. For example, between 2007 and 2022, productivity in the UK grew by barely 4%, almost a third of the figure recorded, for instance, by Germany. The UK is not growing. And that is by far the biggest problem of all. This lack of momentum has meant that per capita household incomes have been stagnant for a decade and have lost ground on the international stage. In other words, in relative terms to the rest of the world, the British are getting poorer, or to be precise, less wealthy. To make matters worse, Sunak found on his arrival to power in October 2022 that the country had the highest tax burden since 2008. Because that's another story. Taxes in the UK keep rising, despite the fact that household incomes are not growing and the economy is stagnating. Well, this is the bleak economic picture he had to face after his arrival at 10 Downing Street. In order to right the ship, Sunak presented himself as a calm profile, capable of steering the course towards economic orthodoxy and stability. That, at least, was the idea and his promise. And the truth is that, at first, the waters did calm down. The duo of Sunak in Downing Street and Jeremy Hunt in the Chancellor of the Exchequer convinced the markets. From the outset, both Sunak and Hunt assured everyone that the break with the European Union would not be as radical as Johnson or Truss had once suggested. And so, the law that Truss introduced with the aim of ending 4,000 regulations coming from the Union was put on the back burner. On the other hand, in an attempt to overcome the stagnation of the British economy, Sunak's government announced that it would invest in fast-growing sectors such as green technologies and other technology sectors. However, investments in these areas have earned it harsh criticism for the minimal amounts proposed compared to countries such as the United States.
Britain's $1.3 billion semiconductor support plan gets cool response.
But obviously, it is quite reasonable that Sunak is not announcing big plans. First, because he is afraid of triggering another pound crisis. And second, because his banner has always been austerity. Now, is he really as austere as he says? Well, the truth, my VisualPolitik viewers, is not so much, especially since the polls have not shown any improvement. You know how it goes, there is no one who loves spending more than a politician who is doing badly in the polls. Thus, in 2023, for example, Chancellor Hunt announced a sharp expansion in social benefits for families, and even in the fight against climate change, the Sunak government, which has been repeatedly branded as anti-environmentalist, has not hesitated in increasing investment in matters such as the thermal insulation of houses.
Government plans £6 billion to insulate UK houses and gives go-ahead for Sizewell C.
In the end, Sunak's plan has borne little resemblance to a true austerity plan. Despite his promises to bring order, public debt continues to grow and is already close to 100% of GDP. And the worst thing is that, despite all the stimulus, the economy has continued to stagnate. In 2023, it grew by only 0.5%. Meanwhile, it is neither economic growth nor public debt that is worrying both the British people and Sunak's own government. Pay attention.
NHS, inflation and migration, the major challenges.
I think we would all agree that countries always have some sort of handicap. Argentina, inflation. Spain, chronic high unemployment. And the UK, well, they have their lumbering National Health Service, which has been immersed in a deep crisis for years. You see, in the UK, there is a shortage of doctors, nurses, assistants, and beds. In other words, they're low on everything. No wonder then that waiting lists in the British Health Service have soared to exceed a queue of 7 million people by 2023. But what is the reason for the sorry state of the NHS? Well, you see, many analysts point to the very nature of the service. Unlike other healthcare systems in Europe, the NHS has been shaped as a hospital-based system rather than a primary care-based system. That is, it puts prevention on the back burner. This is particularly problematic as, according to some estimates, 2 out of every 3 inpatient beds are for patients with chronic conditions such as diabetes, a condition which, while it should be treated by a doctor, should not require a hospital bed. However, the fact that patients with these chronic diseases occupy hospital beds is also due to the NHS's own incentive system. The more patients and the more activity a hospital has, the more funding they will receive. As a result, many hospitals provide unnecessary treatment to patients who do not need hospital beds, delaying their medical leave. It is estimated that in 2023, more than 1 in 10 hospital beds were occupied by patients who did not really need them. Yet, there is another reason that is constantly pointed to: lack of funding. In recent years, the UK has been cutting relative healthcare spending to be 21% lower in per capita terms than France and 39% lower than Germany. In fact, at the beginning of Sunak's term, nursing staff salaries were only £9.50 an hour. Following Sunak's arrival, the UK government is trying to improve conditions in the NHS. It agreed to a 5% pay rise for nurses, expanded the social care budget for 2023 and 2024, and has started the push for so-called virtual wards, with the aim of collecting vital patient data from home. However, these modest measures have not reversed the critical situation of the NHS, where waiting lists are already close to 8 million people. It is clear that, in this regard, Sunak is also failing to meet another of its major objectives. However, despite this failure, Sunak did manage to tackle, or at least was fortunate enough to manage, another of the crises that has been choking the British people the most: the inflation crisis. In fact, the United Kingdom was the country in Europe where energy bills soared the most.
UK power prices hit record high amid cold snap and lack of wind power.
Overall, Sunak was faced with inflation of around 17% in December 2022. Inflation that was particularly affecting the poorest 30% of the British population, who saw their purchasing power vanishing. However, with the Bank of England raising interest rates to 5.25% by the end of 2023, the objective was achieved: to drastically reduce inflation. And while this change has been mainly the result of the central bank's interest rate policy, the government is still boasting. Next, illegal immigration has been another of the main political axes of this cabinet. We've already talked about this on VisualPolitik. In fact, it was in this area that Sunak placed his great electoral hopes. And so, between July and September 2023, the arrival of illegal immigrants fell by 33%. And this despite the initial failure of the law he wanted to push through to send asylum seekers directly to Rwanda. The reduction in inflation and immigration policy seemed to restore some confidence to conservatives ahead of the upcoming elections. But has it really been enough? Well, let's take a look.
Elections 2024, an impossible feat?
Earlier this year, Sunak assured that the British people would go to the polls in the second half of 2024. It stands to reason that the Prime Minister would like to go into the election with better numbers than he is reaping today in the polls. And the 20-point gap between Labour and the Conservatives is devastating. So, you see, although Sunak's arrival initially renewed and strengthened the Conservative image, as soon as the honeymoon was over, everything went from bad to worse. Now, being so close to the elections, this Prime Minister is trying to get his act together to try to save both his image and that of his party. Now, being so close to the elections, this Prime Minister is trying to get his act together to try to save both his image and that of his party. First, he has distanced himself from the measures his predecessors adopted. The Prime Minister has deemed many of the commitments they made to be absolutely unfeasible. Sunak has also scrapped, for example, much of the climate agenda pushed by Theresa May in her last year in office. This has meant delaying the end of the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles and the phase out of gas boilers, both scheduled for 2030 and 2035. But in addition, he has also tried to moderate his ministerial cabinet. In November 2023, Sunak got rid of Suella Braverman, his interior minister and main political opponent within the party. Braverman, one of the toughest voices against immigration, was replaced by James Cleverly, a moderate who was in charge of the government's foreign affairs, a position that went to former Prime Minister David Cameron. To everyone's surprise. Mind you, he now finds himself neck deep in a dangerous game. The cabinet's moderation may help him regain votes that are being lost to the Liberal Democrats, a minor party, but at the same time, he also risks losing the support of the hard right that Braverman represented. Realistically, however, this is probably not the current Premier's greatest concern. In fact, his greatest fear has a name: Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. Starmer, a human rights lawyer, took the helm of the Labour Party in 2020. He did so with a much more moderate message than that of his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. He, along with promises of more social rights, subsidies, and protectionism, have sent Labour soaring in the polls. Starmer has been able to exploit the popular wariness, and guess what? He has a very long list of gripes and arguments to be able to comfortably win the election. Long waiting lists in the NHS, economic stagnation, schools falling apart. Everything points to the fact that this election will be like taking candy from a baby. As a result, Starmer continues to lead by a wide margin in all polls. However, in the Conservative Party, they remain hopeful for one reason. The scenario for Sunak is very similar to that of John Major in 1992. You see, in 1991, the Conservative Party decided to oust Margaret Thatcher. The Conservatives then put a moderate, John Major, in charge. Major, who was perceived as friendly, intelligent, and hard-working, and who also had an excellent political resume, went on to win the 1992 election by a landslide. Today, many Conservatives see Sunak as a similar case. He is also considered intelligent and hard-working, has achieved some political successes, and has managed to bring inflation back on track while pointing out the danger of a Labour presidency. Still, right now, the difference in the polls is striking. So, you see, Sunak faces an almost impossible task: refloating the Conservative Party that his successors managed to sink, and which, for the moment, he has not managed to wipe clean. Facing a strong Labour Party, Sunak continues to sink in the polls. There are still months left for the Prime Minister to turn the situation around before the elections, but people are fed up after more than 13 years of Conservative government, and the truth is that everything indicates that Sunak will need a miracle to be able to emerge victorious. But at this point, the questions are now for all of you. What do you think Sunak should do to turn the situation around? Will he lose the support of the most extreme sector of his party? Will he end up creating a surprise in this year's elections? You can leave me your answers down in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel, hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best, see you soon.